Good evening, dear listener. The fire is warm and the night is still. Tonight, I invite you to lean in and let your heart be open. For this isn't just another tale. It's a reminder that sometimes the answers we search for come from above, just not in the way we expect. They told her she was crazy to wait. But when the signs came, one after another, she knew something bigger was at work. This is the story of Leah, a nurse from rural Tennessee, and how her unwavering faith changed the lives of strangers she hadn't even met. Leah Howard had always been the kind of woman who saw things a little differently. Born in 1989 in Cookeville, Tennessee, she was raised in a modest home with a rusted mailbox and the scent of fried okra drifting from the kitchen window. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a homemaker, and both believed in the power of hard work and honest prayer. From an early age, Leah was drawn to caring for others. She bandaged scraped knees, sat with classmates when they cried, and by 16, she knew she wanted to be a nurse. Not just any nurse, one that made people feel seen and loved, even in their last moments. After graduating from Tennessee Tech, she took a job in Nashville in 2011, working nights in a hospice unit. It was emotionally heavy, but to Leah, it was holy ground. She said it was where heaven kissed earth, when the soul prepared to leave the body. For 10 years, she stayed. And then, in 2021, something changed. One morning in March, Leah awoke from a vivid dream. She was standing in a field of golden wheat. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stood barefoot in front of her. He held a white feather in one hand and pointed to the sky with the other. "They're waiting," he whispered, "but only if you follow." She jolted awake. Her clock blinked. 3:16 a.m. It wasn't just the dream that haunted her, it was the clock. John 3:16, her childhood verse. The dream repeated 2 nights later, then again, always at 3:16. She told a friend at church, and they brushed it off with a smile. "Maybe you're just stressed," they said. But Leah knew better. She began to pray, deeply, desperately. "God, if you're trying to speak, I'm listening." That summer, another strange thing happened. On her lunch break at the hospital, she overheard a conversation in the chapel. A woman crying said, "I just wish someone could find Micah. My grandson needs a home, and I'm too old to raise him. He's only 9. Leah froze. Micah, a boy, 9 years old. Could this be the boy from her dream? She approached the woman gently. Her name was Martha. Her daughter had died suddenly from a stroke, and Micah had been placed in a temporary foster care shelter. The case was tangled. No father on record, no relatives nearby. Leah offered to help. "I don't know what I can do," she said, "but I'll pray and I'll ask." What she didn't know was that her simple act of compassion had just set something divine in motion. For the next several weeks, Leah checked on Martha after each shift. The old woman lived in a small, creaky apartment near East Nashville, her living room lined with photos of her late daughter and handwritten cards from Micah. The boy had been moved to a foster group home 2 counties over. No visitors allowed yet. Leah prayed on it constantly. She lit candles in church, left sticky notes with scripture on her bathroom mirror, talked to God like he was sitting in the passenger seat of her beat-up Honda. Lord, if I'm meant to help this boy, show me the way, make it plain. Then came the feather. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon in late September. Leah was walking to her car in the hospital parking lot when a pure white feather landed directly on her windshield. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't. A white feather, just like in the dream, just like the boy held. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. "Okay, God," she whispered, heart pounding. "I'm listening." That night she applied to become a licensed foster parent. Her friends thought she was losing it. "You're not even married," one said. "You're going to raise someone else's child based on a dream and a feather." Leah just smiled. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. The process was slow, agonizing even. Home inspections, background checks, interviews. Leah's savings dwindled. She had to cut back on hours to attend mandatory classes. Martha's health was failing fast, and time was running out. But Leah persisted. Every wall that appeared in front of her, she prayed down, and every no eventually became a not yet. Finally, on the first Friday of January 2022, she got the call. "Leah, Micah's caseworker approved your application. He can move in next week." She dropped the phone and fell to her knees. Micah was quiet at first, pale, gaunt. He clutched a blue backpack and didn't speak more than 2 words during the drive home. But in the corner of his room that night, Leah saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. A single white feather rested on his windowsill. She never told him about her dreams or the feather on her car. She just tucked it into a box in her drawer labeled God's fingerprints. Micah slowly warmed to her. He began calling her Miss Leah after a few weeks, and Mama Leah by month 3. He loved puzzles, hated broccoli, and cried in his sleep. But most notably, he never talked about his mother. One afternoon in July 2022, while they were driving back from the park, Micah said something that chilled Leah to the bone. "You're not the first one who came looking for me," he said softly. Leah glanced in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He stared out the window. "Sometimes I dream of a woman standing in a wheat field. She has the same eyes as you." Leah nearly swerved off the road. She didn't respond, just held the steering wheel tighter. She understood now. God hadn't just given her a sign. He had given Micah one too. Leah never told Micah what she knew. She didn't need to. The dreams, the feathers, the timing. It was all too precise to be coincidence. Instead, she poured herself into motherhood. She kept working part-time at the hospice center, but her focus shifted. She learned how to braid Micah's hair, how to make pancakes shaped like animals, and how to sit with him when the nightmares came, without trying to fix them. But in October 2023, Micah began to change. It started with headaches, then fatigue, then a fainting spell during a soccer game. Leah rushed him to the emergency room at Vanderbilt. The scans came back within hours. Leukemia, the doctor said. The word landed like a hammer. It wasn't advanced, they said. Caught early, treatable, but aggressive. Micah, at just 11 years old, would need chemotherapy. Leah didn't cry in front of him. She went to the hospital chapel and screamed into a pillow for 20 minutes instead. God, how could you give him to me? Just to take him away. She didn't get an answer. Not that day. But she stayed, sat through every treatment, held Micah's hand when he threw up, sang hymns in the hospital room late at night, and she prayed. Harder than she ever had in her life. In February 2024, the hospital assigned a new oncologist to Micah's case. Her name was Dr. Raina Wells. She was brilliant, sharp, compassionate, and oddly, she seemed familiar. Not familiar in the way of someone you've met, but in the way of someone your spirit recognizes before your mind does. On her second day, while reading Micah's chart aloud, she looked up at Leah and said, "Have we met before?" Leah shook her head. "I don't think so." Dr. Wells tilted her head. "I had a dream last week. You were standing in a wheat field." Leah went cold. That night, Leah pulled out the dream journal she'd hidden away years ago, the sketches, the feathers, the verse 316 written over and over again. She stared at the pages until tears blurred the ink. 3 people had now seen the wheat field in dreams. A child, a nurse, a doctor. There was no logic, no explanation, just alignment. Divine alignment. That week, Micah's fever spiked. The chemo wasn't responding the way they'd hoped. Dr. Wells called Leah in privately. "We may need to start preparing, just in case." Leah shook her head. "I believe he's going to be healed. I've seen it." "Leah," Dr. Wells sighed. "I want to believe that too. But no," Leah said, voice trembling. "He's going to be okay. God didn't bring me to him just to bury him." The weeks that followed were the darkest of Leah's life. Micah's body weakened. His eyes lost their usual spark. There were nights when his breathing became so shallow that Leah would sit beside him with her hand over his heart, making sure he was still there. But through it all, she never stopped praying. One cold morning in early April 2024, Leah walked into the hospital chapel and saw something that made her knees buckle. Dozens of white feathers scattered across the pews. They weren't part of any display. No wedding had been hosted. No decoration out of place. She asked the chaplain, who said, "I've never seen anything like it." She picked one up. It was soft, pure. She took it as a promise. On April 9th, Micah slipped into a coma. The doctors weren't sure why. It wasn't a typical chemo response. They ran tests, adjusted medications, and ruled out infections. Nothing added up. Raina Wells sat next to Leah, at 3 a.m. in the waiting room. "He's not gone," she said, "but it's like he's somewhere else." "I know," Leah whispered. "What do you mean?" Leah took a deep breath. "I think he's in the field." Raina stared at her, then nodded. "I dreamed about it again last night," she said softly. "He was standing at the edge, holding a feather." They sat in silence. Two women from different lives, brought together by a boy who saw angels. 3 days passed. Then something impossible happened. At 3:16 a.m. on April 12th, Micah opened his eyes. The nurse on duty was so stunned she dropped her clipboard. His vitals normalized within hours. By sunrise, he was sitting up in bed, eating toast, asking for chocolate milk. No one could explain it. Not the doctors, not the specialists flown in from St. Jude's. His oncologist said, "There's no medical reasoning. I don't have a file code for this." Leah did. She labeled it miracle. When she asked Micah what he remembered, he looked at her calmly and said, "I was in the field. The boy with the feather was there. He said it wasn't time yet. He said, 'You still needed me.'" Leah covered her mouth and sobbed. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Leah called it God. The hospital discharged Micah 10 days later. He walked out holding Leah's hand, his steps still wobbly, but his spirit stronger than ever. A child who had stared death in the eye and smiled back. Raina Wells hugged Leah tightly outside the hospital doors. "I'll never forget him," she said. "Or you." Leah nodded. "We never walk alone." That summer, Micah returned to school part-time. He started therapy. Leah enrolled him in music lessons. He picked the violin, said it made him feel closer to the wind, like the sound of feathers in the air. They moved into a small house on the edge of Cookville, with a backyard that stretched toward a wheat field. Leah never planned it that way. It just happened. One morning, Micah was playing outside when Leah heard him call out, "Come see this." She walked out barefoot onto the dewy grass. There, in the center of the yard, stood a circle of white feathers, dozens of them, as if a whirlwind had dropped them from heaven. Micah was laughing. "I told you," he said. "They're watching." Leah knew that skeptics would never believe their story. The dreams, the feathers, the impossible healing. But she didn't need them to believe. She had seen too much, felt too much. God had written himself into every line of their journey. In August 2024, she officially adopted Micah. The judge, moved by their story, added a note into the court record. This child was not placed. He was destined. On the day of the adoption, Leah gave Micah a gift. It was a box labeled God's Fingerprints. Inside were 3 white feathers, a sketch of the wheat field, a printed photo of him smiling in the hospital bed, and a slip of paper that read, John 3:16. He held it for a long time before saying, "Can we keep adding to it?" She nodded. As long as we live. By early 2025, Leah and Micah's story had quietly traveled beyond Cookville. Not because they told it, but because people who witnessed it couldn't keep it to themselves. A nurse at the hospital wrote about it anonymously in a local blog. A traveling pastor heard the story secondhand and used it in a sermon about unanswered prayers. And one day, Raina Wells herself was invited to speak at a medical ethics conference in Washington, D.C. She ended her speech with this sentence: "I no longer believe that miracles are rare. I believe they're just rarely noticed." On the anniversary of his remission, Micah asked to visit the hospital chapel again. He stood at the altar, now taller, stronger, hair growing back. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Leah watched from the back pew, tears in her eyes. She didn't know what their future would look like. She didn't know if the feathers would ever return. But she knew this: God had not abandoned them in the waiting. He had been in the dreams, in the field, in the coma, in the whisper, and in the healing. Not loud, not flashy, just faithful. And as for you, dear listener, if you've ever felt forgotten, delayed, or uncertain about what comes next, remember Leah. Remember the feathers. Remember that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about holding on through the silence. Tonight's story reminds us that divine intervention often hides in the ordinary. That waiting is not the absence of action, it's the presence of trust. And that miracles don't need fanfare, they only need faith. Thank you for being part of our little fireside circle this evening. If the story touched your heart and would like to listen to more like it, you know where to find us.